Good afternoon, everyone. America is at a fork in the road, and the question before the American people is which direction will we choose? President Biden and House Democrats unequivocally support a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. Extreme MAGA Republicans want to criminalize abortion care, impose a nationwide ban, and restrict access to IVF and contraception. President Biden and House Democrats want to protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. Extreme MAGA Republicans will end Social Security and Medicare as we know it. President Biden and House Democrats are working hard to lower housing costs, end price gouging, and grow the middle class. The only thing that extreme MAGA Republicans care about are big, massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. There's a big difference between President Biden and House Democrats on the one hand and the extreme MAGA Republican agenda on the other. That's the contrast that is before the American people. And each and every day here in the House of Representatives, we see the Republican majority continue to try to jam their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people and do the bidding of big donors and big business. House Democrats will continue to fight to solve problems and deliver real results for everyday Americans. Questions?
Mr. Leader, your party just got through a divisive primary in New York where you saw an incumbent fall. You have another one coming up in Missouri. How would you describe the tension between the moderate members of your party and the progressive members of your party? And is it your responsibility as a leader to support your incumbents that are in these vulnerable primaries?
Yes, and that's what I've consistently done.
In the Bowman primary, we saw a PAC, super PAC spend upwards of $14 million. Do you think that type of spending is appropriate? And many Democrats on the left of your caucus have forcefully called it out. Do you join with them in condemning that type of outside spending?
I think that pro-Israel groups are going to support pro-Israel members of Congress. Pro-reproductive freedom groups are going to support pro-reproductive freedom members of Congress. Pro-climate groups are going to support pro-climate members of Congress or candidates who are out in the communities throughout the country. Our view on democracy reform broadly is that we have to do everything possible to protect and strengthen a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, which is why the House Democratic position, shared broadly by progressives, New Dems, and Blue Dogs, is that we have to get the Freedom to Vote Act, which is our signature piece of democracy reform legislation, over the finish line. In this Congress, the Freedom to Vote Act is H.R. 11. If we get the gavels back, the Freedom to Vote Act will be H.R. 1. That's our view, shared broadly by the entirety of the House Democratic Caucus as to how to make sure we have the most accessible, authentic, and available electoral system possible. Second row. Okay.
What message?
That was very generous of you to yield.
What message do you think it sends that Jamal Bowman lost his
From the very beginning of my journey in Congress, there hasn't been an electoral cycle where a sitting member of the House Democratic Caucus hasn't lost. It only happens in a handful of occasions each and every Congress. It's only happened once in this cycle. So in my view, it's hard to draw any general conclusion when the overwhelming majority of incumbent members of the House Democratic Caucus, from the moment that I first showed up in Washington, D.C., have been reelected. Each district is unique. Each campaign is unique. And as we do every cycle, at the end of the cycle, we try to figure out what lessons can be learned from the decisions that have been made by the voters that we're privileged to represent. Second row.
Does Congresswoman Cori Bush have Democratic leadership support heading into her primary, and how will that translate into appearances or financial support over the next 7 years?
We have supported, as House Democratic leaders, every single incumbent member of the House Democratic Caucus, and there's no expectation, as far as I can tell, that that will change. We have a process to discuss the manner in which any endorsements are rolled out and presented to the communities that our members are privileged to represent. That process is ongoing right now for Representative Bush and several other members who will face the voters in August.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Have you been briefed on the taxable energy and commerce markup on the privacy bill? And do you support that piece of legislation?
I have not been briefed, but there are real concerns that exist in terms of some of the pro-civil liberties and pro-civil rights provisions in that legislation that were taken out by the extreme MAGA Republicans. And I was very skeptical of the legislation that was going to be before the Energy and Commerce Committee, though had not taken a position. The legislation and the markup ran into problems on the Republican side, as far as I can tell, because big business interests made clear to House Republican leadership that they did not support the efforts that were underway in good faith to protect the privacy of the American consumer. That's the reason that the privacy legislation and the markup were taken down. We are willing to enter into good faith conversations led by Frank Pallone to try to arrive at comprehensive, robust privacy protections for the American people. But those legislative efforts should also involve protecting the civil rights of the American people and confronting issues related to algorithmic bias that impact communities of color.
Are you watching the debate tonight, and if so, how?
I look forward to watching the debate. There are several gatherings that members of the House Democratic Caucus will be holding, including one being held by the Congressional Black Caucus that I plan to stop by this evening.
Slater, what do you make of sort of the political fighting going on the floor right now when it comes to the amendments on these spending bills, ranging from defunding Ukraine, cutting Mayorkas' salary? There was even one that didn't make it to the floor to oppose IDF.
The extreme MAGA Republican majority is not serious about governing. They are serious about jamming their reckless far-right ideology down the throats of the American people. We've seen it from the very beginning of this Congress, and it has not let up, and it never will, because the House Republican Conference is completely and totally out of control. They needed Democrats to step in to save them from themselves and plunging this Congress into further dysfunction. And every single major piece of legislation that has moved forward in this Congress has done so because of majority support from House Democrats. That's the way it's been. That's the way it's going to be until the end of the 118th Congress. Kevin?
If I can circle back to Bowman, is there anything that you feel, I know you endorsed him, you did the robocall, is there anything else you feel you could have done or should have done in that race? And then separately, the Supreme Court is still not weighted on the immunity case. I'm just curious what you think of the fact that we're still waiting for some sort of indication.
In my capacity as House Democratic leader, I have the responsibility of traveling all throughout the country. It takes me away from the 8th Congressional District of Brooklyn that I'm privileged to represent more than had ever been the case in my previous 10 years in Congress. And I'm thankful that the people in the 8th Congressional District that I represent have given me the grace and space because of the fragility of the moment and the need to protect our country, defend our democracy, and fight for freedom, which means taking back the gavels in November. It's the expectation of members of the House Democratic Caucus, which includes progressive New Dems and Blue Dogs, that it's all hands on deck for House Democratic leaders in terms of making sure we are there to take back control on November 5th, because the stakes are incredibly high. At the same time, we're going to continue to do all that we can, given the limitations and constraints that we have, as part of an existential moment to take back the House, to be supportive of our colleagues, as has been the case in New York, in New Jersey, in Texas, and in many other states where there have been members who have had primaries, and in those states over the next 2 months where members will have primaries.
To his second point about the Supreme Court, we still haven't heard about the immunity case, and they also announced that they're adding a day, Monday in July, for the first time in a few years. What's your reaction to that?
And what is so complicated about making it clear to the American people that in this great country, no one is above the law? We all know that the extreme far right MAGA majority on the United States Supreme Court is totally out of control. They detonated Roe v. Wade and reproductive freedom for millions of women across this country, ended affirmative action and the ability for colleges and universities to make sure that their campuses look like America from being brought to life, and are probably preparing to undermine Congress's ability to enact consumer protection laws designed to benefit the health, safety, and well-being of the American people. But with respect to the immunity issue, this should be crystal clear. America is not an autocracy, and it's not a monarchy. We don't have kings in America. We have a democracy. And in a democracy, no one is above the law. What is so complicated about this decision at this moment? We know that Justice Thomas and Justice Alito are out of control and driven by a far-right ideology that is way outside of the American mainstream. But it's not clear why some of the other justices haven't swiftly come to the conclusion that Donald Trump, as a former president, is subject to the same set of laws, expectations, and norms as the American people.
Another one in the Bowman primary. To the earlier question about what messages sends, I appreciated that there isn't maybe a general message from that, but you're familiar with the politics of your state. Members of your caucus have offered a variety of different theories as to why Bowman lost. Some of them blame the impact. Some of them say Bowman was out of sync with his district. Why do you think he lost?
Again, at the end of the election cycle, we will naturally evaluate the results that have happened all across the country in primaries and general elections and try to figure out what conclusions can be drawn as part of the effort to make us the best representatives possible moving forward. The voters of the Bronx and Westchester County have spoken. Those voters made a decision in June of 2020, and we respected it. Those voters have now made a decision in June of 2024, and we respect it. Representative Jamal Bowman came to Congress and has championed several important causes, including economic justice, public housing, and the ability for our children to have a high quality public education. That advocacy has been forceful and meaningful. And all of us wish him well in his next chapter of public service.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. A lot of eyes are going to be watching the debate tonight. Have you had a chance to speak with President Biden, and what would be your advice to him for debating former president?
I have not spoken to President Biden in connection with the debate over the last several days, but I think it's important for President Biden simply to be himself. He is authentic. His life experiences are those shared by ordinary, everyday Americans. He's experienced family pain. He's persevered through it, and he remains in the arena because he cares about making life better for the American people. President Biden has an incredible track record of doing just that and solving problems for hardworking American families. And most importantly, has a compelling vision moving forward to grow the middle class, end price gouging, and lower costs for the American people, while at the same time restoring reproductive freedom for the women of America and defending democracy. President Biden has a great story to tell, and I expect that he's going to tell it in a compelling way, notwithstanding the foolishness that we are likely to see from the insurrectionist in chief, who is his opponent.
Senator Jeffries, I just want to know, are you concerned about the economic message coming from the group Black Americans for Trump and if they could be making a dent in Black communities? Yesterday they held a round table at a barber shop and they were pushing priorities they described as access to capital and generational wealth.
No, the Republicans, since the time that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt were elected, have had every opportunity to demonstrate a willingness to meet the needs of communities of color, including the African American community, and they've consistently failed. This 11th hour attempt, which is not anchored in any reality, when Donald Trump had 4 years in office to make a difference with respect to the economic fortunes and well-being of the African American community, and failed to do it when Republicans had complete control of government. Why would anyone reasonably believe that if Donald Trump had complete control of the House and the Senate, but failed to act in any meaningful way to transform the economic fortunes of everyday Americans generally, and the Black and Latino community specifically, that it would happen now, when he'll have no electoral incentive to do so, were we all to experience the great misfortune of him getting a second term. It's not going to happen. President Biden actually has a track record of success that includes historic investment in Black colleges and universities, as well as Hispanic serving institutions. Black unemployment is at its lowest level in recorded history. Small business creation is up for every demographic across America, as well as home ownership opportunities on the rise for communities of color. There is much more work to be done because we have been operating in a high cost of living environment that is a direct result of the shutdown of the economy connected to the COVID-19 pandemic and the implications on the supply chain that resulted from it. But there's a lot to be proud of in terms of President Biden's track record in creating millions of good paying jobs, rescuing the economy from a once in a century pandemic, lowering the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for millions of Americans, including dropping the price of insulin for many to $35 a month, and bringing domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America as a result of the CHIPS and Science Act. Joe Biden actually has a track record to credibly articulate a vision for making life better over the next 4 years, because he's been doing the work, and now together we have to finish the job.
Just circling back to the topic of abortion, I want to get your reaction to the ruling from the Supreme Court on the case in Idaho on the medical emergencies.
The Supreme Court has once again failed to appropriately reverse course, which would involve restoring the protections that have been lost as a result of the fall of Roe v. Wade. Supreme Court has set in motion the ability for states like Idaho to enact draconian laws that restrict the ability of a woman to make her own reproductive health care decisions. And there's not much that will change as a result of this procedural Supreme Court decision. Supreme Court understands, in terms of the far right majority, that they overreached, but now they've unleashed fury all across America, and there's nothing that they can do to stop it. The only way at this point in time that we can restore the protections of Roe v. Wade and build upon it in terms of both access to IVF and contraception, which the extreme MAGA Republicans would like to end in any meaningful way, is to pass the Women's Health Protection Act and other pieces of legislation that would actually restore freedom to the women of America, as opposed to having it taken away even further, which is what the extreme MAGA Republicans would like to accomplish. Last question.
We've seen a slew of House appropriations releases this week on with deep cuts to the FBI, Labor Department, Education Department. Can you talk a little bit about the content of that? What it portends for potential Trump administration in the state election?
Extreme MAGA Republicans are marching us to a government shutdown. House Democrats, Senate Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and President Biden reached an agreement in May of last year in connection with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act. The agreement requires us in this fiscal year that is upcoming to mark to the number of 1681. Instead, extreme MAGA Republicans have broken their word once again and are marking down to a number of 1606. That means they are cutting $75 billion out of non-defense discretionary funding, which will hurt children, hurt working families, hurt the ability to administer Social Security, and also hurt the veterans of the United States of America, among others. Extreme MAGA Republicans are showing us who they are, which are individuals who have no interest in protecting the health, safety, and economic well-being of everyday Americans because they are solely focused in terms of economic policy and tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, the well-connected, and their big donors. That's a contrast that will be before the American people over the next several months. House Democrats will continue to put people over politics. Thank you.